Nuestra siguiente invitada es la representante de Sadlier. Demos la bienvenida a Nicole Stephen. Nicole Stephen is a national academic consultant with Sadlier School. She is a licensed teacher certified in grades 1 to 6 and special education from the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. Nicole has worked for Sadlier for over 6 years. First as a sales representative in the New England area, and more recently as a national consultant supporting teachers as they learn about Sadlier's academic programs. So let's welcome Nicole. Nicole, thank you for being here today as well.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here again today. Thank you so much. I'm really excited to introduce you to 2 programs of Sadlier's that I know will have incredible impact on your students. So today we're going to talk about Vocabulary Workshop Tools for Excellence, which is a brand new addition for Sadlier, and another title called Close Reading of Complex Text. Next slide. So our Vocabulary Workshop Tools for Excellence is more than just a word list. It does provide teachers with systematic and direct instruction for students. And the way that the words are introduced is that we teach them in context as well as by definition. It's going to give students multiple exposures to new words in a variety of formats. And you can use this in a blended learning model. So this is available in print. It can be used in a hybrid situation, or it can all be delivered via online instruction. Next slide. The resources for instruction include print components for grades 6 through 12 plus. So it does extend beyond the high school grade range. We have our consumable student book and our annotated teacher's edition. And then optionally, test booklets could be used as well. The student test booklets include mastery checklist, a warm-up test, unit tests, cumulative tests, and we also have an opportunity to prep students for those standardized exams. So ACT and SAT exam booklets that have practice texts, include reading passages, relevant words, and students would have to answer evidence-based questions that are similar to the types of items that they would find on those standardized tests. Next slide. You do have the option of delivering this instruction digitally to students, which is a wonderful way to engage students as part of their vocabulary instruction. So the interactive edition would provide the audio for the passage, flashcards, all different types of interactive games to engage students. The games and the interactive activities are lesson specific, so you're focused on specifically working with that word list. There's also opportunity for a differentiated passage and online assessments. Next slide. The way that we present the words is 15 out of the 20 words in each unit would be addressed within the passage. There are going to be 15 units, and after every 3rd unit, there is a review that features vocabulary for comprehension, as well as plenty of word study activities. Next slide. Each unit will begin with a nonfiction passage, so that's informational text, and each opening passage features at least 15 of the 20 focus words bolded throughout the passage. So this is an opportunity for students to understand the new word meaning using context clues. Teachers can model how to use context clues here with the opening passage. And research tells us that students need multiple exposures to words for vocabulary acquisition. So it's important to also teach the words explicitly, as well as word learning strategies. Next slide. After our opening passage, students will be more formally introduced to their new unit words. So in this section, during the definitions component, we are going to give students a grade level appropriate definition or explanation. The dictionary pronunciation will be part of this instruction. You'll also have the part of speech and a sample sentence to clarify meaning. We'll also introduce students to synonyms and antonyms if there are any for those words. Next slide. The practice set is going to follow immediately after. So here is where students begin to work with the words and up the number of exposures. The first practice set is called Choosing the Right Word. And here students are asked to choose the best word to complete the sentence. And we want them to use context clues in the sentence to choose the correct word. It is scaffolded, so we're asking students to just choose from one of 2 words here. Next slide. Students can then continue to make connections with their new words using synonyms and antonyms activities. We know that students do sometimes struggle with synonyms and antonyms. The teacher can lead this as a collaborative educational practice. Next slide. And following the synonyms and antonyms, we now have completing the sentence. So now students have the opportunity to work with all 20 words, and there are going to be context clues embedded in these sentences. We know that students can reference the word list at the beginning of the unit, so mastery is not necessary, but we are, again, working with the number of exposures here for acquisition. Next slide. Each unit contains a writing words in action section. This is where we want students to use several of the vocabulary words that they are acquiring in their open response. So the first question is going to be a text-dependent question. There's going to be a second question here in this particular version of Vocabulary Workshop, and this is going to be an SAT, ACT type question. Next slide. We always include classic literature in the vocabulary and context literary text component. So this is a great way for students to have exposure to grade level appropriate classic novels. They'll read the passages, answer the question. And there is a fun QR code that students can scan with their phones to take that quick interactive quiz to see how they're progressing with mastery of those vocabulary words. Next slide, please. After every third unit, Vocabulary Workshop Tools for Excellence will feature a review. So this has 2 comprehension activities. And again, these mirror the types of questions students are seeing on state and national tests. These passages contain words that are included in the previously taught units. So this review unit is for units 1 through 3. There'll be a selection of words from those units embedded here. Next slide. As part of each review, we will work on word study. So here students work on connotation and denotation. Next slide. Students also have the opportunity to practice with classical roots, and then we alternate between adages, idioms, or proverbs. So very important concepts to teach students explicitly. These can be taught in the form of a mini lesson. And again, students have the opportunity to work with this word study to really help them determine how to use these strategies to determine the meaning of unfamiliar words. Next slide. Inside of the Teacher's Edition, which is full of resources to help support your instruction, we do provide some literature connections. So if teachers want to extend the learning, there are some novels that we have aligned with the specific units. Next slide. And if you need some background information as the instructor on the passage, we do provide you with an explanation of each opening passage, as well as the lexile level for the passage. So that's an important thing for teachers to keep in mind as they are choosing their specific text for students. Next slide. We also offer our critical thinking questions for each passage. This is a great way to lead that conversation about the passage for students. It can be collaborative in class, or you could assign something like this for homework. Next slide. Oops, sorry, keep going. Next slide, please. And one more. There we go. And finally, just as a recap, one really important component of Vocabulary Workshop, which is very widely used across the United States, is the interactive edition of the vocabulary program. So again, it's done completely online. Teachers assign all resources for students to work through. They can do it collaboratively. They can do it in class. They can do it for homework. And students will receive auto-scored information. So they do the student practice exercise, they receive an immediate score, the teacher receives a report. So a really engaging way to help students with their vocabulary acquisition. Next slide. All right, so I also want to introduce you to close reading of complex text. Next slide. So here's a quote that you may or may not have seen before. It says, "Read like a detective, write like a reporter." And so what does it mean to read like a detective? It means to read for deep understanding of the text. And we know that that's what good readers do. And with a good close reading approach, students have developed those habits to read those complex texts, and we want them to be able to deepen their understanding about what they've read. Next slide. So what is close reading and why is it so important? So close reading is a strategy that centers around reading a text more than once to understand its deeper meaning. So I want to walk you through how we introduce students to the close reading strategy and the routine in class. But first, I want to talk a little bit about the key features of this particular program. So next slide, please. So there's 8 key features of close reading. The first is based on short text. So students should do a close reading with a short text. This is not designed to be done with a novel. Also, the text needs to be very complex. It's measured in several ways, so quantitative, qualitative, and reader and task. So we want to make sure that it's difficult enough for students. It's not part of that frustration point, but we also want to make sure that it's compelling, right? We want to make sure that students are interested and it's something that they want to learn about. So it's more than just about the lexile level of the book. All right, the next bullet point says limited front loading. And what that means is teachers should not set the students up to understand what they're going to be reading about. So we don't tell students a lot of background information about the text. We let them discover that with some of the routine. Okay, the next bullet point says multiple reads. We want students to know that they're going to read this short text, this short, difficult text multiple times. All right, my next bullet point says annotating the text. So we want students to learn how to annotate text so that they're always mindful of the focus question and their reading purpose. We also want them to ask text-dependent questions. So what are the right questions for them to understand the text deeper? We also want students to have collaborative conversations so that they can share their ideas with their peers. And then during close assessment, there's multiple times to assess students' understanding of what they read. So a quick comprehension check as part of the assessment. So that walks you through all the key features of our close reading program, but let's do the next slide, please. So as part of the close reading program that we have put together, we collaborated with the following authors, Diane Lapp, Barbara Moss, Maria Grant, and Kelly Johnson, to really put together a collection of short, complex text that students can use as part of this routine. So I'm really excited to introduce you to those. Next slide, please. So here's the organization of the program. It's a specific strategy that you do have to introduce students to. So at the very beginning of this resource, we start with the Getting Started with Close Reading Guide. And so this is what I want to walk you through because it would be key here to make sure that students understand how to approach these texts in a way that makes sense for the annotation and for the comprehension questions, the collaboration. So this helps students approach the text in the close reading model. So our unit structure is we always have a focus question, and this is going to unify 4 text. There's going to be a visual text and 3 complex text. And then, as I mentioned, we have that focus question. There's an opportunity for students to analyze and synthesize across text, and then self-assess and reflect. So this is the organization of each unit, but we start with our Getting Started guide, and we make sure students know how to approach close reading. Next slide. So the Getting Started guide, this is going to take students through the elements that they'll apply throughout the program. So here are the steps that we want to introduce students to: reading closely, how to annotate a text, using important self-monitoring strategies, how to summarize, and also how to read a visual text. So we start with a really compelling topic or a focus question. We get students engaged, have them read 3 different varieties of complex text and give them a related visual. All right, next slide, please. So here's where we begin. We want to tell students, what does it mean to read closely? So it means reading and rereading for deeper understanding. So the first read, we talk to students about the first read and we tell them this is to gain a general knowledge of the text. What are the key ideas and major points? Who are the characters? Where does the action take place and what happened? So that's our first step. Then we go on to a second read. And the second time we read, we want to focus more on the language used by the author and maybe the structure of the text. So we're looking for things like, how is the text organized? Is it in a chronological order? Is it problem and solution, cause and effect? What does this text look like? And why does the author's use of figurative language give you understanding about what's happening? And then once we go back and do that third read, we want students to look for meaning by making inferences. How is the author helping them to understand the text? What doesn't he say explicitly? And what's the theme? So there's 3 reads, and that's how students begin. Next step. So then we'll move on to annotating a text. So this is the next step in close reading. This is how the student is interacting with the text. And over here on the left-hand side of my slide, it mentions that we're going to underline key ideas and major points. We write a question mark next to anything that's confusing, circle key words and phrases, and put an exclamation point next to surprising or important information. We want to walk students through that and model that for them. Next step. We also introduce students to those self-monitoring strategies. So this is similar to doing that self-check, that self-assessment. So are students visualizing? Are they asking themselves questions? How are they drawing conclusions? Are they rereading to clarify? Go back and reread more slowly. Next slide. And finally, we want students to practice summarizing. So they'll cite important facts from the text, identify evidence, and we have them organize it in a graphic organizer. So we walk students through the 3 reads. We walk them through the annotation. We walk them through the self-monitoring, and finally, the final step, summarizing. Next slide. We also introduce students to this concept of reading a visual text. So images can make you think about ideas in ways that you may have not have thought about them before. So the visual text is thematically tied to the complex text that we've introduced as part of the unit. So here's a chance for students to analyze the image as a whole, look at the details, and try to gain a deeper understanding of it. Next slide. So we don't need to make this super complex for students. We want to break it down into an easy to understand step-by-step process. So one of the things that we've done here is we provide all the text sets and the text dependent questions. So you'll have the 3 related text with the visual image and all the questions that you need to ask your students. You do not have to come up with them on your own. Inside of the teacher resource, you'll have scaffolded support. So students do need a lot of support and guidance with a close reading model. Any support that you need is in the margins in the teacher's edition. And then don't forget about what I just introduced you to, the Getting Started Guide with close reading. So students will become familiar with the routine and be able to implement that over time with the different chapters. Next slide. So I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have, either about Vocabulary Workshop Tools for Excellence or our close reading program.
Hi, thank you, Nicole. That was wonderful. Yes. Well, before, let me tell the audience that si tienen algunas preguntas, les agradecemos que las pongan en el chat para que Nicole las conteste. I do have a couple questions, if you don't mind.
Of course.
Okay, thank you very much. So I was wondering first, from the vocabulary workshop, you were mentioning that the books can help you to prepare students for the ACTs and the SATs. And you know that nowadays there's it's famous to take the Duolingo test. And I was wondering, I mean, what about those tests like TOEFL and Duolingo? Do you think that these books work to prepare students for this type of exams?
So I would have to do some research to see if the passages and the types of questions that we ask align with the similar type of question that are asked on that test. So in order for it to prepare students effectively, we would mirror the passage as well as the questions. They wouldn't be the same, but they would resemble what students would experience and encounter there. So I'm not familiar with the types of passages and questions that are on those assessments, but if they are similar to the ACT and SAT, which are very much text-dependent questions, they rely a lot on analogies, a lot on vocabulary knowledge. If that is the type and style of question that those assessments are asking of students, then yes, this would help prepare them for that.
Wow, yeah, they're like more or less alike, yeah. So then I was wondering, you were talking about the annotation a moment on the reading, the other group of books that you have, that you can have some annotation text when you're like doing the reading comprehension and the whole breaking down the reading. So you can actually write on the books about like underline, making the question marks. You write on the book, all those?
You do. So you would model it as the teacher, and you would show students how to underline key ideas and details, put a question next to things that they don't understand. You would do a think aloud and show students how you're doing it. And then they have a student workbook. So they would go through the passage and make their own annotations.
Oh, okay. So, and I was also asking you, so the book, this series of books, they take you to teach how to definitely analyze a reading. I mean, like it goes step by step, like how to do it. So there is some people asking me questions over here, and some of them would like you to, if you could talk about the platform from Sadlier, the Sadlier Connection.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So Sadlier Connect offers an interactive edition for both of the programs that I just presented to you. So the way that works is students and teachers all receive logins, unique usernames and passwords. And when you access the platform, you'll go to a library. You'll click on the book cover that is related to the program that you want to work in. So if you clicked on vocabulary workshop, you'd enter vocabulary workshop. If you clicked on close reading, you'd enter close reading. And then teachers have assigned things to students within the platform. So say you have assigned the students Unit 1 in vocabulary workshop, they'll see that assignment on their assignment list. They'll work through Unit 1. And maybe the teacher has assigned them a number of texts to read and annotate online. So we also have the annotation tools that are interactive. The student can submit those to the teacher for review, and the teacher will score that appropriately. So it's really a phenomenal way to provide really engaging instruction. It gets students active and working online, submitting things for instant feedback. And it's really a unique way to deliver instruction for these two programs. So potentially you could do this remotely. You could do a hybrid model. So you provide the instruction in class and then they do the online at home, or you can have them work on it in class too. So 3 different options, all using the same resource.
Okay, and do they include the ebooks? I mean, through the platform, can you get to the ebook? So that's something different. It's like apart on.
That is all included on the Sadlier Connect platform. So it is a one location for all of our programs. And it includes things like ebooks, assessments, interactive practice, games, study aids. And for many of the programs that I've talked about in the past few days, we do have all of those resources available for multiple grade levels.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Nicole. So if we don't have any other questions, muchísimas gracias a Nicole. Vamos a tomar...